Welcome to this episode of Rethink Vertical. I want to say a special thanks to today's sponsor, the Oklahoma Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics. So my special guest today is Doug Wood. Doug is on staff with ODAA, joined the Oklahoma Department in January of 2022. He brings 26 years of law enforcement and U.S. Navy experience, including 17 years as a first-line supervisor with responsibilities for training, supervisory management, and administrative tasks. This includes project development and leadership for the first small Unmanned Aircraft System program at the Riley County Police Department in Kansas. So Doug covers 77 counties as the state manager for advanced air mobility. Doug reports trending unmanned and air mobility policy to the executive director of the department and the agency's director of government affairs as it relates to Oklahoma statutes. He works with Oklahoma stakeholders, including commercial businesses, academic institutions, state and municipal entities, tribal governments, and the Federal Aviation Administration to promote advanced air mobility, unmanned aircraft systems, and emerging aviation technology in the state of Oklahoma. Doug conducts research related to national and international trends and best practices regarding regulations for advanced air mobility and UAS to determine how Oklahoma can best position itself within the industry. Doug is the state's expert in air mobility and develops and updates the Oklahoma Advanced Air Mobility Strategic Plan, advising other state agencies and local and tribal governments on advanced air mobility and UAS operations, regulations, and policies. Really interesting conversation. Hope everyone enjoys today's episode. All right, everyone, welcome to this episode of Rethink Vertical, and my guest today, Doug Wood. Doug is a colleague and a friend, and so Doug, apologize it's taken so long to get you on the podcast, but there's been a lot going on, and so we wanted to let some of that flesh out, and now there's a lot to talk about going on in the state, and happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. For the folks that don't know you, I think it's be good to hear a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the UAS AM space in Oklahoma.
Well, that's kind of interesting because I kind of backed into this space. I'm originally from Kansas. Now I'm an Oklahoma transplant. Been here a little over 2 years. My background primarily is in law enforcement. I spent 25 years with the Riley County, Kansas Police Department. Which is Manhattan. I'll say go K-State just because
right.
I gotta fly the colors. But my wife is an Oklahoma State grad, and so she's happy to be back down here in Oklahoma. But I did pretty much everything you could do in a medium-sized law enforcement agency, from working in the jail to delivering to the court's mail as a civil process officer, to being a detective, and finally ending up as a supervisor for the last half of my career. But in about 2016, as retirement was looming in the future, I kind of looked around and decided that I didn't really have any after retirement skills. A lot of people in law enforcement and the fire service and others do, heating and air, or they work on cars, or they have a side gig, and that's what they plan to do afterwards. And I didn't have that. So I was looking around, and one day I'm driving through Annenberg Park on patrol, and I saw this gentleman out with this great big monster octocopter, a DJI S1000. It's about 5 feet across, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I want to go talk to that guy. So I went over and we started talking with him.
Is this legal? Is it legal for him to do?
Yeah, well,
right. Here's part of that, right?
I'm a cop. Go investigate. So anyway, so we had a long conversation, and the end of that was he was in the UAS industry, both in small UAS and some larger stuff. Had a business in McPherson, Kansas, and I thought, I could be a drone pilot. I think that'd be kind of cool. So we discussed it, and I had several conversations with him and came up with a plan and was going to do some schooling. And then Part 107 came along, for those of you that are familiar with that. And he called me up one day and says, hey, you need to go take this test and get your drone license. This is all you got to do. And I did that. And so I did what everybody else who gets a drone license does, is start my own little one-man band drone business.
Right there,
and real estate and working for construction companies and doing that type of stuff. So then in November of 2016, 17, my chief of police had come back from a conference and found out that I was a drone pilot, and called me in and said, hey, we're interested in starting a drone program. Do you want to run it? And I was like, yes, sir. that sounds like a great idea.
Right.
And for those on the law enforcement public safety side, when the chief wants something done and is willing to support it, it's a lot easier to be successful than trying to push
Yeah.
that uphill. So we had implemented a drone program, and I ran that for 5 years as a team leader. And again, looking towards retirement in the future, and was looking for what I was going to do afterwards. I was keeping my eye out, and the position here for the UAS program manager for then the Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission opened up. And I talked to my wife, and she's like, I wouldn't mind moving back to Oklahoma. And so I was like, well, all right, I'll apply for it. And I had not filled out a job application or a resume in 25 years.
Right.
So I did that, and I was successful, and Director Grayson Arties hired me for the position. So I retired from the police department and moved down here in January of 2021.
Yeah, so we're a little bit kindred spirits because we both came back to Oklahoma. Well, I guess you came to Oklahoma, I came back to Oklahoma almost at the exact same time, and so we started learning about the ecosystem, who are the players in the state. So just kind of it's crazy that it's been over 2 years now since that's happened. 3 years, practically 3 years, a little over 3 years now, huh?
Yeah, we're into June, so it's 2.5 for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So previously, Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission. I know that there was recently a change in both the agency name and then also your title from UAS program manager to state. Is it state program manager now or state?
State manager for advanced air mobility.
There you go. Because we added in advanced air mobility, right? Because that's what everybody's having to do now, just because of the way things are going. You want to talk a little bit about what the Oklahoma Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics, right? Did I get that right? ODAA,
that's
or
correct.
I get it backwards? Yeah. So what does that office do within the state, and then maybe a little bit about what your position and kind of strategically how you guys are thinking about the industry?
Sure. So ODAA, or the Oklahoma Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics, has been around in one form or another since 1946, when it was the Aviation Commission, and I think it changed names. Learning the history of the agency is also one of those things that I've been doing. But right. We changed names in I think 1963 when it became the became the Aeronautics Commission. So unlike many states where the aviation division is actually under the Department of Transportation, in my home state of Kansas, for example, here in Oklahoma, the Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics is a separate but equal agency under the Secretary of Transportation. Okay. So under SecTrans, there's ODOT, the Aeronautics, the Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics, and the Turnpike Authority. And so all three of those are co-equal agencies. But the ODAA is actually governed by the Aeronautics Commission, which is a 7-member board that takes care of all of our funding, hiring, and has all the authority to authorize the money for the projects and things that we take care of. And so we have essentially 5 pillars, where we have, administration and operations. We're responsible for the state's aviation airport infrastructure, right? And making sure that all of that is up to snuff. And so we have airport inspectors, we have engineers on staff, and they make sure that those projects that take place in the local communities, we have 107 public airports, and take place in those communities, those projects get done and up to the FAA standards. We have airport development, we have workforce development, we have an aviation education program, we do legislative outreach to ensure that the laws in the state of Oklahoma are favorable to our aviation friends and partners. And then now, in my chair, the Advanced Air Mobility Office. So that office was created as the UAS clearinghouse in 2021.
Okay. So when you say clearinghouse, I know we have talked a little bit about this. From like strategically, when you guys are thinking about from a state perspective, what are the kind of, how do you want to interact with future projects? When you say clearinghouse, what does that really mean for, folks that are in the industry, or, own companies, or founders of companies looking at the state for particular projects? Like, how do they interact with you guys?
Well, we want to be the central point of contact when they come to the state of Oklahoma and say, what is going on in Oklahoma in the UAS or advanced air mobility sphere? I want to come in as a business. I want to come in as a contractor to perhaps supply parts or to supply manpower to a specific industry. My job is to know as much about what's going on in the state of Oklahoma to guide them to introduce them to those companies or to those resources, or you should go talk to the Department of Commerce about those tax incentives or those things that are advantageous for a new business coming in. If there's a company coming in who wants to do aero education, then we obviously are the point of contact for aero education in the state of Oklahoma. So all of those things that come along that are industry related, education related, first come to the Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics, and hopefully we can have enough knowledge about what's going on in the state to guide those folks to those resources.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. As you're talking there, I was thinking about, as you're talking about from state perspective, the states, lots of states thinking about UAS and advanced air mobility, and kind of what it means for them. How do they pay for this, needed infrastructure of the future? From your guys' perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges as you kind of look forward to future needs that you guys are wrestling with, and then kind of how are you building out that plan?
Sure. Well, it's kind of a moving target. No one has created an actual production vehicle if we're talking about advanced air mobility, and they haven't received FAA certification, so we don't know who the winners and losers in that particular race are going to be, and how many of those vehicles are going to be certified, and when that's going to take place. And so, as one of our core missions, obviously, is aviation and aerospace infrastructure. Infrastructure for advanced air mobility and small UAS fits into that category. So when we're talking about, for example, vertiports in the future, or we're talking about transportation corridors for either people delivery or freight delivery, the decisions that are made in the future about how those are implemented in the state will rely largely on our expertise here in the office, either our engineers when it comes to vertiport development and how those rules and regulations and legislative efforts are promulgated. When it comes to how we anticipate what those look like, we've just recently completed our state advanced mobility strategic plan in partnership with ODOT. And so we partnered with HNTB Corporation to help create that plan. We had two subcommittees, the Emerging Aviation Technology Subcommittee, which you're a member of, as well as the Autonomous Vehicle Working Group on the ground side, working with ODOT. And Tom Robbins is the lead on the AV Working Group. And the original intent was those groups were going to essentially do the research and help author that plan. Well, it became significantly larger effort than people with day jobs could participate in. So those committees essentially became advisory and helped lead our researchers to the different areas that they needed to create that. So that strategic plan, when it's released, hopefully later this summer, will be there to guide our legislators. And when it comes to investment in advanced air mobility and advanced ground mobility, to what the first steps are, what the second steps are, what the third steps are. That's kind of where we're going with that, to make sure that those experts and the people doing the research on the economic development side, Nexa Capital, have given us the best opportunity to be successful.
Yeah. So the strategic plan, when you folks are thinking about like, okay, we need this strategic plan, we're gonna use it as source to help develop a roadmap, right? We've talked about the roadmap, you and I have in the past, about the challenge of
flight plan.
Flight plan. Yeah. How do you develop a flight plan, roadmap, whatever you want to call it? I guess it's both air and ground. So for an industry with still a lot of unknowns, right? So You've had a chance to kind of look through it. I know it's not out for public, so I'm going to ask you to provide any details to the folks here. But anything, just broadly, anything as you read through it that, well, were there any surprises that you're like, we need to maybe dig into this piece a little bit more, or does you kind of look at it and go, okay, this is going to be helpful for at least broadly developing those conversations that we need to have about funding and kind of the plan that we need to take and where we can be proactive, where we need to wait. Did you get a good sense from it? Like, okay, this is going to be helpful.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's helpful for a couple of reasons. I mean, it told us a lot of what we already knew or suspected.
Mm-hmm.
Things are changing rapidly. Companies are making rapid advancements. Some areas are not advancing as rapidly as we'd like. For example, battery technology and expanding the range and capabilities of the batteries is something that's a huge challenge, and people are working diligently to solve, because once you've solved that problem and expanded the range of the batteries, then the opportunities for those aircraft to be more efficient, recharge faster, or carry more passengers, all will be greatly expanded.
Right.
But it just really exemplified the difficulties in trying to guess the future of an industry that's never existed before.
Right.
And a lot of investment has been put into this industry. The OEMs, the original plans for the OEMs were for them to create their own infrastructure and I laughingly call it the rental car model, where you go and there's Hertz and there's Avis and there's Enterprise all sitting next to each other. And that was, from my understanding, the original intent, that each of these OEMs would be their own owner operator, and they take care of their own business. And then the states are like, well, no, pick me. And
right.
A number of states have invested a significant number of dollars and a significant number of things in infrastructure, and working with those companies to help advance their opportunities, for sure. But it makes it kind of turns that original business model on its ear. So having this state strategic plan that started probably over a year ago now, March of 22, March of 23, I think that it shows how fast that the industry is moving and how fast some of the projections may be outdated. And so we're trying really hard as we go through the final steps of the strategic plan to account for those rapid changes as best we can, and kind of project out long term where these investments are best placed. We have another project going, and I've joked about it, that I don't want to build the next Olympic Village. We don't want to invest in something now, heavy investment in something now that 2 years from now is outdated. And quite frankly, looking at my position, as I was brought on board as the UAS program manager, and as our rebranding, my title has now changed to State Manager for Advanced Air Mobility. That's how quickly the industry has refocused on large UAS and AAM. So.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna play Oklahoma State Legislator right now, and I'm gonna say, Doug, this all sounds really interesting. There's lots of cool technology. Obviously, Oklahoma is been a leader in aerospace for many, many years, and we want to continue wearing that hat. What is the value add for us being a first mover? Is there, you talk about states going out and offering these OEMs money to come in and be a part of that. When we're talking about building a whole industry throughout the country, what, if any, is the value for having those companies come to Oklahoma first versus let's just wait and see what happens, and then when we know what's going to happen, and then we'll invest money? How do you answer that question? I'm sure you've gotten it. So, or maybe you haven't, I don't know, but you will if you haven't.
Well, there's a significant overlap in that with small and medium UAS and freight delivery.
Yeah, that's true.
People carrying advanced air mobility technologies. And I don't think it's any secret that Oklahoma is probably not going to be the number one place where people are going to start seeing advanced air mobility vehicles flying people from the airport to downtown. That will be in those coastal areas where they have large populations, they have significant amounts of of, of resources
Mhm.
for companies to come in and build their infrastructure. Oklahoma just doesn't have probably the population density right off the bat, so
Right.
we'll be farther down the chain when they start actually putting in commercial operations. However, we are a prime location and have prime opportunities for testing and establishing those types of operations in places that aren't beautiful and sunny and nice 360 days of the year, right?
Right. Right.
Miami or the Bay Area or wherever. So we have a prime location for hostile environment testing, and these aircraft are going to have to fly in hostile environments. They're
Right.
going to have to fly in Denver at altitude and snow and ice. We have wind, we have snow, we have ice, we have cold, we have hot. All of those things that are going to test these aircraft to the extreme, and we have 360 days of flying weather in Oklahoma, and we have beautiful, wide open, sunny skies and places for them to test that aren't over major population centers. So as a testing location, we have a number of advantages with what's taking place in the Choctaw Nation and the testing that they're doing with their Emerging Aviation Technology Center.
Right.
What is going on in Tulsa with the Tulsa Tech Hub and the Osage Nation, Skyway 36, and all of the advantages that are their partnership with Oklahoma State University. We have also the Mike Monroney Center here that is working, getting a test vertiport here in the near future to start looking at those advanced air mobility operations. And we have a number of entities that are willing and wanting to partner with them. I won't call them out right now, but they're
Right.
have been in communication, and I know that there's opportunities there. So we have the ability to be on the ground floor of establishing how these operations are going to take place with all of the testing facilities, the partners that we have here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, there's a lot going on. No doubt about that, especially in the state. A lot of moving parts. When we think about what states are doing, right? We talked a little about what Oklahoma's doing. Um, what's the collaboration among different states as folks? I mean, the different departments of aviation and aerospace, whatever those are called in different states. How are states are they communicating, collaborating, talking about these? Is there value in that? And what's been going on?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that.
Right.
Yeah, Oklahoma has partnered in a multi-state collaborative with, I think, 28 other states at this point. We started
Okay.
last year. One of the things that's recognized is that the FAA has a significant challenge in keeping up with manned aviation as it stands. And this future advanced emerging aviation technology, whether it's package delivery, people delivery, large freight delivery through the air, is going to result in a more crowded airspace, usually at the lower reaches of that airspace. And how the FAA decides to establish what's been commonly called unmanned traffic management, or UTM, and where those boundaries are at. And the FAA has clearly stated that that's their responsibility and that they are going to be responsible for managing that. But whether they do that in person as an agency, whether they subcontract that out to third-party service providers, all of that's up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do know is what happens on the ground is the responsibility of the individual states. And so part of this multi-state collaborative, among other things, is to establish what's being called minimum viable infrastructure. What can the states do to prepare for UTM? What can they do to prepare their ground space, whether that's electrification of airports, whether that's specific laws through their state legislature that are advantageous to making sure that advanced air mobility vehicles and companies are able to operate in their airspace both safely and equitably. Whether you have, it would be a disadvantage to companies if a legislature or a community passed a law that said only company X can operate. They have a contract in our city to fly for company X, and company B can't be there. So, that may be an example of a state law that says you have to allow all the companies access to operate in your area. So that's multi-state collaborative is working on a number of things. The next meeting we're coming up is in Oregon. I'll be attending that virtually, but we're all working towards essentially the same thing. And that information that's derived from these meetings may not apply to all of the states. As a general rule, we're looking to find that those regulations, the infrastructure that works across the board. But different states have different rules about things such as funding. And there are what are called pass-through states, which Oklahoma is, where the funds are passed through to the individual agencies, and then there are what are called block grant states. And I'm nowhere even near an amateur in understanding the intricacies of how those funding mechanisms work, but they're two different models that the funding mechanisms come through. So those particular states that are on one side as a block grant state may have different requirements than those on the other side that are pass-through states. So we'll put out the best information that we have that applies to both.
Yeah, no, that's really important because we get a lot of questions about obviously infrastructure and how communities should be thinking about it and how they should fund it is one of the major questions. Like, how do we pay for this? What are the opportunities out there from a state and federal perspective? So I think the fact that states are collaborating around what these funding mechanisms might be and how the money might flow down to those projects is important for all the communities in the state that they're going to have to understand this and think about it. And some are doing it earlier than others. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're talking about multiple entities, for example, company, pick your advanced air mobility company that will be successful in the future. And so company A is flying in Pennsylvania and company B is flying in Ohio, and their infrastructure is set up in each of those states, but their routes take them across state lines. So now we have an interstate compact issue, and how do their different systems interact with each other? We're back to the cell phone model. When you drive across state lines and you're on Autel as you drive across the state line, and now all of a sudden you're hitting a AT&T tower. Right. How do those interact with each other and allow seamless data flow for these aircraft that are going to be flying predominantly using that data?
Right. Is the state collaborative? Is it sort of is it an official group? Is there a FAA point of contact for this group, or how was that laid out?
No, it started out as a group of 2 or 3 aviation directors who says, "Hey, we need to really start talking about this." Those, they started calling people and saying, "Hey, we're gonna get together and talk about this. Are you interested in being involved?" And I think there were probably 16 of us at the first meeting last November. And that's since grown to 28. And because those aviation directors recognize that this is coming, there's going to be either on the small, even if they're just involved on the small UAS side with their drones as a first responder programs for law enforcement and public safety, or if there are companies coming in that want to look at doing package delivery, small package delivery, drone up, zip line, any of those companies. There's going to be a need for ground space regulation, the minimum viable infrastructure. Right. So that's kind of how that conversation organically started. At the moment, we're just trying to establish some baselines and some guidelines and some parameters of what we're doing, and then we'll bring in industry, we'll bring in the federal government, the FAA, and say, okay, this is kind of what we've established on our side of the fence. Yeah. How does that interact with what you guys are doing on your side?
Yeah. Thinking about a few different projects that are going on in Oklahoma. Maybe 2 or 3 of those that would be helpful for folks to understand and that you want to highlight, and especially for companies that are going like, how do we get involved in the Oklahoma ecosystem? What is ODA thinking about? What kind of projects are they working on? Any of those you want to kind of highlight?
Yeah, I can talk very briefly about OSIDE and the spaceport. We're working on establishing a flight corridor out there. The reason I can't go into any further detail is there's an active RFP
Right.
out for that solicitation. So, but we are working in multiple areas. In that case, we're working with a defense contractor and large UAS.
Mm-hmm.
We're also working with the city of Tulsa on their Tulsa Tech Hub grant and their Drones as a First Responder program with the Tulsa Fire Department, and putting in aviation infrastructure in the form of we've committed to looking at radar systems there. The FAA is, if you are going to fly beyond visual line of sight, which is what we're talking about with small UAS, they are very interested in the safety mitigation case.
Right.
And radar is the number one method of safety mitigation to prevent incursions and conflicts between aircraft. And so when you have an unmanned aircraft flying out of sight of its pilot, and you may have another small aircraft, single engine, personally owned Cessna flying around, you want to make sure that there's not a conflict between those two. And so having a radar system available.
Right. Well, and just to kind of highlight that too for folks that are listening, the thing that sets Tulsa, maybe why is Tulsa different from Dallas, where folks are operating beyond visual line of sight without radar, right? Using ADS-B. Tulsa is different because it's a Class C airspace, right? It's not Class Bravo, so there's fewer requirements on aircraft to cooperate in the system. So I think that's important for folks to know, why Tulsa, why radar in Tulsa versus Dallas or some other communities that are complex, busier airspace. So I think that's be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between commercial operations and public safety operations. The commercial operations where they're doing package delivery have very defined parameters. The routes that the aircraft take, the altitudes that they fly at, have been well defined. They've been well publicized. The entities doing those operations have safety parameters that are very restrictive into how they operate. Public safety operations, on the other hand, are kind of ad hoc. An emergency pops up and the drone has to fly, and you don't have time to do all of that other notification or advising or intersecting with other aircraft that may be flying, which leads us into another program that we've implemented here. We've partnered with the state of Virginia on a flight information exchange. There, it's called the Virginia Fix. Here, we're calling it the Oklahoma Fix, or Oklahoma Flight Information Exchange. And this is a state sponsored and funded enterprise that is taking existing data sources and putting it on a website that's publicly available for anybody operating small and large UAS, to help deconflict with either ground obstructions or future aerial operations. And so there's two sides to the system. We're onboarding new users, primarily in the public safety sphere at this time, but the existing data sources that are available, whether that's radar, whether that's ADS-B, whether that's remote ID, cameras, any of those types of things that we can put out there so people can see where operations are taking place. And then the other side of it is data sources input by the operators. So the general public can see at a base level what's taking place in the city of Tulsa or the city of Oklahoma City and the rest of the state. But there'll be levels of secure access, whether that's industry and commercial operations or at a higher tier public safety operations, where for example, a oil pipeline company doing a pipeline inspection when beyond visual line of sight rules are in effect, maybe doing 100 miles of pipeline inspection in southeast Oklahoma. And so their drone will be flying 100 miles beyond visual line of sight from the actual operator. Those companies can put those operations into the system, essentially like a NOTAM, and then perhaps a manned aviation crop dusting company, in doing their pre-risk mitigation, can go on the system as a user and say, we're going to be flying our crop dusting operations in this particular area. And then all of a sudden the system shows an overlap between those two operations and notifies both operators. Hey, you've put in an operation that conflicts with another. You guys need to be aware that they're going to be flying in the same airspace. And so, a crop duster doesn't have the time to be looking for a drone at 200 feet when they're flying low. And so having that notification ahead of time means that they can go, I need to be watching for a drone flying over this particular section. Likewise, public safety operations, we have an emergency pop-up, a fire, a large incident, public safety incident. They can put up a public safety bubble that says, hey, there's a public safety incident taking place here. And a package delivery company like DroneUp or Zipline can automatically be notified and reroute their package deliveries around that particular area. So this is a system that's being put in place by ODAA to support UAS and AAM operations in the state, and we're providing that as a service.
Yeah. So just for clarity, it's really it's an information exchange. It's for folks it's for awareness, right? I think well, correct me if I'm wrong. This is not a UTM system. This is not going to, using this system is not going to get you a waiver from the FAA to operate beyond visual line of sight. There's a whole level of layer of safety technology. It's going to be required. This is just something that the state wants to make available. It's not going to help DroneUp fly BVLOS and do their operations. Or am I wrong? Is that the plan?
No, this is a base level of minimum viable infrastructure for safe UAS operations, but those operations are the responsibility of the individual pilots or individual companies that are doing those flights. This is just simply making information available to them so that they can increase the safety of their operations. Now, in the future, when the FAA comes down with different rules, then this information can then be incorporated into a UTM system. Since it's publicly available data and we're providing it publicly, it's already being incorporated into systems like Aloft and other Lance service providers. So the advantage is they can go into Aloft or another Lance service provider and they can put their request for an operation in a 100-foot grid, for those who know what I'm talking about. And the information from the Oklahoma Flight Information Exchange is being fed into that system. And likewise, their operations are being fed back into our system so that other drone operators can see where that drone operator is operating.
So this is really the first go at like truly publicly funded infrastructure to support the industry that so here's my question. Do private companies have to pay in any way for access to this information, or it's included as part of whatever subscription they have to whatever private service, and the private service like Aloft gets it for free? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we're not charging to have people on the system. There's an application process. So if you go down to Best Buy and buy a drone and you're just flying around your backyard and maybe you just want to fly and take pictures, there's a public facing side that doesn't cost anything. You don't have to apply for anything. You can just go onto the web site and see what data has been input. But for commercial operators, the TV news stations, the oil industry, the telecommunications industry, they have a vested interest in having their operations not only documented, but having access to where those other aircraft are flying or other obstructions are to help with their safety case, especially if they're requesting through their own channels waivers or authorizations from the FAA. And if they're able to put into their application that information is being fed to them through the Oklahoma Flight Information Exchange, that just provides an extra level of safety mitigation for the FAA to consider. And so we're not charging a membership fee, but what we do is we vet the users. We want to make sure that the people who are using this data on the commercial side, on the public safety side, have a reason to have that level of access, because the information that's provided as you gain level of access is much more detailed about what kind of the other operations are, particularly on the public safety side. And so we want to make sure that the users of that information have the requisite need at their level of access.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. I know we've talked about this, but every time we talk about it, there's like one other thing. It's like, oh, how are they dealing with this? No, I think it's a really interesting model. It's one that the industry has the industry, private industry, wants folks to be working towards, right? It's like that concept of GPS. It's like we need to be able to use this data source for safety. We can't really afford to pay lots of money for it. Free would be great, right? So how do we, infrastructure is not cheap, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this changes, right? So it's one thing to take in publicly available data sources, or if it's something that's more advanced like radar data or ADSB receivers, like if the state can fund that hardware infrastructure and then feed it into the system, that's great, but that stuff gets expensive over time. It's a significant portion of the FAA budget to maintain that hardware infrastructure, maintenance, software updates. So how do states manage the cost of this, right? That'll be one of the challenges I think that folks are kind of going to have to look at pretty seriously.
Well, and obviously one of our agency's central pillars is the infrastructure of the state. And on the manned aviation side, obviously, at each of those airports, we work diligently with federal, state, and local dollars for example, hangars or runway repair or taxiways, those things that are infrastructure to support and keep our aviation industry flowing. Now that advanced air mobility is here, now that advanced air mobility is a central piece of what ODAA does, those infrastructure needs obviously have to be assessed at the state level as a state responsibility and as a state resource. So having a system like the Oklahoma Flight Information Exchange be a safety mitigation piece, we consider to be part of the infrastructure for these advanced air mobility vehicles and small unmanned aircraft systems to operate in the state. And I think having it as a state resource, as opposed to even a third party, data service provider operating independently, is a much better option for our citizens and for the companies that want to operate in the state.
Yeah. I want to cover just a couple more things kind of as we get towards the end of the podcast here. One is, something that you and I have talked about for a while, along with others within the state, is the concept of Blue UAS and some of the costs associated with going through that process. And a lot of the folks that are listening are familiar with Blue UAS and what it means. And so you want to walk us through some of the conversations and maybe specifically the project that the state's kind of working on with OSU?
Sure. So Blue UAS kind of, for those that aren't aware, is a DIU, Defense Innovation Unit initiative that came out of the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, where part of that requirement is that drones be cyber secure and not be able to transmit their data information to potential hostile actors or countries. And so no one was really doing the research that was required for that to happen. And so the Defense Innovation Unit contacted, and the individuals at DIU were Marines. And so they started with the Marine Corps and said, what drones are needed to be used for military operations? What do you need? And we'll buy those and test them. And so then out of that came the Blue List. And the Blue List is often misunderstood as the only way that aircraft can be certified as meeting the NDAA requirements. But it also took an effort on the part of the military and DIU to establish a testing protocol for that. It would be very easy for the Department of Interior, Department of Energy to establish their own protocol to test aircraft for their use. They just decided that they would use the Blue List as what they wanted, as aircraft that had already been tested. Multiple states have decided that aircraft should be off the Blue List if they're going to be utilized within their state. And that's caused a significant conflict because the leading aircraft company for drones is DJI, as most people know, and they are essentially the Honda or the Toyota of the drone world. They do it the cheapest, they do it the best, they have the best features, and they also have the significant advantage of having government resources behind them. And the challenge is, how does a American or other company compete with that? under those requirements. The other advantage that they have is they're very agile and flexible. As they get feedback from their users, they can quickly change cameras or software or operating parameters because they don't have any restrictions on. They just fix it and go. For those companies that have aircraft that meet the NDAA requirement, any change to those aircraft have to go back through that certification process, or at least that piece of it, which means they're considerably less agile and it costs a lot more money. And so they're not as cheap and efficient. And that's just an unfortunate reality. So, while you were there at the AUVSI conference in Florida, I was there with members from Oklahoma State University, and we were discussing this as a problem and thought, well, we've got the resources to establish a location in Oklahoma at Oklahoma State University and with other partners to do the NDAA testing here. And so we had some conversations with DIU and with AUVSI, and AVSI eventually came out with what's called the Green List. And so the Green List was an effort to be a step down from Blue, but still meet all of the NDAA requirements. And in conversations with AUVSI and Oklahoma State University and Tulsa University on the cyber side, it was decided that we would expand this program and partner with AUVSI to bring that to Oklahoma. So at the AUVSI just recently in San Diego, we were able to make an announcement that the companies that were doing the original testing and AUVSI and the University of Tulsa and Oklahoma State University were going to start testing aircraft here in the state of Oklahoma to meet those NDAA requirements and hopefully make that cost to those commercial companies significantly less worrisome or significantly less onerous on their operations. One of the advantages to having DIU test their aircraft was it didn't cost the companies anything. DIU purchased those companies at retail cost, or purchased those aircraft at retail cost, and then tested them. So there was no cost to the companies. When you flip that model to having the Green List and having aircraft or having companies apply to have their aircraft tested, there's a significant cost to the companies to have their aircraft tested. And so that became a challenge. So having this collaboration, we hope will not only provide workforce development here in Oklahoma, it'll provide training for our future cyber workers from University of Tulsa. It'll provide training for our future aviation and aircraft engineering at Oklahoma State University, and we'll provide opportunities here in Oklahoma for companies to come in to the state.
Right. Yeah, and the other big piece is the pipeline, right? So it's great if you can get DIU to buy the platform retail and come in and test it. And the problem is everybody wants that, and so there's a long list of companies, a long backlog and list of companies wanting to do that. So it may be a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long to get through that. And so I think one of the value adds for the Green US program is it just reduces the timeline, right? If you need to get your product out there and if you go back through it again, you're not waiting 2 or 3 years to do that. So that's going to be, you're talking about scaling. That's what private industry needs. And the Blue UAS process was never intended to certify private industry to go out and scale commercially, right? It's just kind of what it's turned into, I feel like. So I'm excited about this program and project. I know that this is something that you've been working on for a long time, and hopefully it's successful. And I know that there's already at least some folks in that process, right?
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Since it's not now really a state.
Right.
I mean, we're still in it.
You're supporting it. You've kind of handed it off to the engineers. You're not tearing down drones in your free time as a side hustle.
The day-to-day operations are the responsibility of the pen testing and the cyber side belongs to you, and then the actual aircraft teardown and does it meet the requirements of the NDA physically and all the parts and components and chips. That's that all comes to Oklahoma State. And the big thing is on the DIU side, their focus was military operations.
Right.
And so an aircraft that may be very viable for operations and built in the United States and have all of those things that meet the NDAA, if it doesn't have a military application, they
Right.
wouldn't even look at it.
Right. That's
So
true.
that this provides an opportunity for those companies to get their aircraft up to speed.
Right. Yeah.
The other challenge, just to be on the technical side, was
Yeah.
if the aircraft failed certification, there was no methodology
Hmm.
for the companies to understand what was wrong and how they needed to fix it.
It was just,
then
nope,
try to be-
you failed. Right. And that's
Yeah.
it.
And so Oklahoma State and Tulsa are providing that background information and providing support to those
Right.
companies.
Here's how you can fix it and make it, so it'll pass, right? Is what you need to do.
Well, and for many people who know that, doing the onboarding for the military side specifically and meeting the requirements of the federal government for cybersecurity, having your networks tested is a expensive proposition. And so a lot of small mom and pop aircraft parts manufacturers who may have, and we're getting away from UASAM for a moment, but may have a great part for, the Air Force's B-52 or the F-35, but can't get through the cyber requirements to even be a vendor to the military. This program also will provide training to those students that are going to be working in that area and can help provide those resources and maybe get some of our small Oklahoma commercial companies that want to do business that way. And so that we see a huge benefit, not only in the UASAM side, but also on the manned aviation and acquisition side for the government.
Right. Probably time to wrap this up. We'll probably need multiple conversations to cover everything going on in the state and with the ODA and new things to come, new announcements to come. So we'll have to have a round 2 of this conversation. But Doug, I appreciate you taking out time and having a conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to be a part of the UAS Cluster Initiative community and get access to more of our content, check us out at www.uascluster.com.